Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Family Become What You Are. Last episode, I talked about how marriage images the Trinity, how the institution of marriage that God created expresses something about who He is. Even before we do anything, marriage expresses something about God's identity. And how the love of spouses is oftentimes made manifest or concretized in a baby. Something I didn't think to say that I wanted to say is that oftentimes a lot of people, many people do suffer from infertility. And I just wanted to say one note about that because I didn't think to say it last week, that this is a real cross. My wife and I know several couples that suffer from infertility, and it's a real form of suffering. And I think it's important to recognize that. Um, I also wanted to say that even if a couple does not have children, it doesn't mean that their love is not fruitful. Christian marriage is spiritually fruitful, and children are the physical manifestation of that. Um, so a couple's love, a married couple's love, is still fruitful. Oftentimes, that fruitfulness is expressed or made manifest in other ways. Maybe being a very hospitable couple, maybe serving the poor in the community, and maybe they may be called to foster or adopt children, although that's not always the case. So just a note on that, on how marriage images who God is as a Trinity. But a second thing that marriage does is it doesn't just express who God is in Himself, but marriage is also an icon of God's love for the world. I think this was a quote from Pope Francis, that marriage is an icon of God's love for us, God's love for the world, and each of us in particular. So imagine if God wanted the world to know how much He loves us, each of us individually in particular, what would He do to show it? Well, we know He sent His only Son, but even before then, with the institution of marriage, He gave us a little taste of what His love for us is like. So that when we see spouses love each other, we get a little taste of what God's love for us is like. And it's really fascinating. If you look through the Bible, there is a really strong theme, a central theme of marriage. Marital imagery is throughout the whole Bible, beginning with Genesis 2, the wedding of Adam and Eve, all through the Old Testament, talking about God as our maker and also as our bridegroom. And then into the New Testament with Jesus and the church, which might sound weird, but actually Jesus is the bridegroom and the church is His bride. And that includes us. That includes you and me, women and men, that we are the bride of Christ, that we are the beloved of Jesus, that He seeks us out to love us. And when we receive His love in prayer and sacraments, through community, especially the sacrament of the Eucharist, then we are filled up with His love, and then we are able to love our spouse. We're able to pour out that love on our spouse. And what's amazing, like in the last video I mentioned, is that actually marriage itself is one of the 7 sacraments, which means it makes God's divine life present, and His divine love present in our lives. And so if we fall into a serious sin, a mortal sin, that clogs up that flow of grace. It's almost like having clogged arteries or clogged plumbing pipes, and we need Drano to clean out the pipe. In the same sense, we get spiritually clogged arteries or clogged pipes. And the sacrament of reconciliation or confession is that sacrament of mercy that breaks open that clog and creates a free flow of God's grace again in our lives, in our families, in our marriages, so that we can love our spouse, so we can love our children, and that our marriages can be an image of God's love for the world, to help our families become what they are, an image of God. With everything that's going on in the world right now, we all see this in the news and experience it, all the division, the conflict, the unrest in the world. And we might feel like we need to do something big and important out there. And we're certainly part of society and need to engage in greater in what's going on in our country. But I think Jesus tells us that to him that is faithful in small matters, he will be given more. And Jesus emphasizes we need to be faithful first in small matters. And in fact, our sphere of influence is first in our smallest circle, in our closest relationships, which is our marriage, and then our family life, and then our local community before it's our country, before it's our nation. I think this is why Mother Teresa oftentimes said so many things about this, about loving those closest to us. Here's a quote from her acceptance speech when she received the Nobel Peace Prize. I think it was 1979. She says this. She said, "I'm sure in the families and many of our homes, maybe we are not hungry for a piece of bread, but maybe there is somebody there in the family who is unwanted, unloved, uncared, forgotten. There isn't love. Love begins in the home." So she's following up very concretely on what Jesus says about those who are faithful in small matters. And for most of us, that means in our family life, in our marriages. So the first thing we're called to do is start in our marriage, our family, which spills out our community. And how could there be peace in the world? How could there be peace in our country if there's not first peace in our marriages? Because the world is made up of families, and what happens in the family is what happens at large in society, since society is just a family of families. So what can each of us do this week? Maybe something to concretely to take away from this video. What can each of us do this week to establish peace, to establish love in our marriages, so that this flows out to our children, our community, and eventually to our country? And Mother Teresa, you've probably heard quotes from her. She might suggest we start simply with a smile. And loving our spouse with a smile, even if no one sees it, in a hidden way, we establish love in our little corner of the world. And for those who do experience the love in our marriages, they get a little taste of God's great love for the world and God's great love for each of us in particular.